Hey there, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, where I take a concept, a strategy, something that we use in autism fitness programming, and bring it to you so that you can bring it to your autism and neurodivergent life skill athletes and enhance the fitness or adapted PE programs that you're currently running, that you're planning on running, or that you just thought now might be a good idea to run. Anyway, before I get started, please definitely subscribe, and share these videos with people for whom they might make a difference. Now, in this edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, I'm going to be talking about something that comes up or has come up in the past with some of my athletes, and that is the difference between pain and discomfort with relation to exercise activities. Now, there are some very important considerations both for safety and for our intake and communication with our athletes and families as well. So right from the beginning, the first thing that we want to consider if an athlete is ever demonstrating or vocalizing, or we observe that the athlete is uncomfortable or experiencing some type of true duress or distress, is we want to, as best as we can, check in with them to make sure that they are okay. And as professionals and practitioners, we want to make sure that we have an accurate and up-to-date medical history for all of our athletes. You know, if an athlete has had a history of seizures or a history of falls or has broken an arm or broken a leg in the past, if an athlete has some type of spinal issue like scoliosis, these are very rudimentary and very important things to know about in advance, because it may inhibit some of the movement that we have an athlete do. We may need to modify it. So these are things that we want to know up front. In continuing this, sometimes, particularly in the initial phases of introducing exercise, again, we focus on resistance training in our autism fitness programming, we may have an athlete say that something hurts. Now, we always want to respect the athlete and take what they're saying at face value initially. However, it does lead us to ask some more and very important questions about whether and how the athlete is experiencing the movement, the exercise, whatever they're doing right now. And there are some important considerations that we can take into account in order to come out with the most reasonable or logical or most likely situation that's occurring. So when an athlete says that something hurts, the first thing that I tend to do is ask, okay, well, the classic, well, where does it hurt? What part is it bothering? Because some of our athletes, particularly those who have less verbal communication, may not be able to fully articulate what's going on for them. So they may give us a general idea of it. It hurts in the shoulder, or it hurts in the arm, or it hurts in the knees, it hurts in the legs, whatever might be going on for them. So a lot of this might be lost in the translation or lack thereof, because our athlete may not have the verbal capability or even the language to convey exactly what's going on for them. So they're probably not going to say, oh, my bicep hurts when I go into full flexion here, but they may say my arm hurts, and then it's our job to kind of decipher that and figure out what the athlete means by that. But that is not the end of the story right there. Again, this can move a couple different ways, so we need to approach this carefully with respect to the athlete, and also ask the right questions as well. So the second thing is whether the athlete has a history, or to the extent that we or other professionals and parents and family members know, is this athlete hypo or hyper sensitive to different environmental conditions or different input. For example, I've worked with a number of athletes throughout my career who are hypersensitive to heat, but hyposensitive to cold, meaning they could stand out in 40-degree weather in a pair of shorts and a tank top and be totally fine. But if it goes above 75 degrees, they are in distress because they overheat easily or easier than the neurotypical population. So these are important things to know about our athletes. Now, let's consolidate and confine this just a little bit more to the exercise situation and something that is at the heart of what I'm talking about. That's the difference between pain and discomfort when the athlete is performing a particular exercise, a squat or an overhead press, or a band row. I've had instances where an athlete says something hurts because they are unfamiliar with the exercise, unfamiliar with that movement pattern, because it's challenging. That is a big one and something that we need to keep not even in midbrain, but front of brain when this happens. And the athlete, coming back to that issue of articulation, may not be able to differentiate or articulate the difference between pain and discomfort. With exercise, particularly when it becomes challenging, and it needs to, by the way, become challenging for our athletes in order for it to have a training effect, that doesn't mean that we are overloading them with a particular exercise or making it more progressed than they need it right now. But for example, if we have an athlete doing a squat of doing a set of 8 to 10 squats to a box and they've never done that before, it is probably going to produce a certain level of discomfort or challenge for that athlete. Typically, as we know, or as you will discover if this is the beginning of your journey in coaching and providing fitness programming for the ASD and neurodivergent population, most of the autism population is detrained in that they have never done vigorous physical activity, particularly resistance training, before. That being the case, any new exercise is probably going to have a quality of discomfort or the experience of discomfort with it because the individual has never been challenged in that particular way before. So those muscles working and them experiencing some fatigue and maybe even a small amount of use stress, which is good stress, but stress nonetheless, can lead to them experiencing it as discomfort, but understanding it as pain. So there might be a slight crossover. Something feels painful, but it might actually be uncomfortable. Now, I may not say this directly or immediately to an athlete, and I'm certainly not going to deny what they experience. So if they say this hurts, my first question is, okay, where exactly does it hurt when you're doing it? And does it hurt when you are going up? Does it hurt when you are lowering the weight? At what point does it hurt? Because I want to get a gauge of where they're experiencing the pain, right? If in fact they can communicate that to me, and that's really important. The second thing is I will try to scaffold this with some new language. It may not take immediately because the athlete is still trying to figure this out, but I will ask, are you in pain or is it uncomfortable? Because those are two vastly different things. When any of us are being challenged with a particular exercise, unless we are really familiar and kind of like that stimulus also because we enjoy that challenge, it certainly can be stressful and it can feel, it can feel not painful, but it can feel sometimes awkward, or it can increase our sensory overload, and certainly it can be uncomfortable as well. I think the first time most neurotypical people do a heavier set of squats or heavy carries or try push-ups for the first time, there's an amount of discomfort with that because the movement is unfamiliar. We're still developing our kinesthetic awareness around the exercise. And our joints are stabilizing while we're performing this movement. Their muscles are contracting. There's a lot going on. So for many of our autistic athletes, this can be an opportunity for them to experience something that they haven't before, and they may be processing that as pain because they haven't had the discomfort portion of this occur yet. And once our athletes become more familiar with that exercise, then they are able to say this is hard or this is difficult or this is challenging if in fact they have that language. But one of the beautiful things about incorporating fitness programming is we can start building in some of these language targets for our athletes as well. So things like stressful and challenging and uncomfortable and resilience. These are all things that we can build into the session, maybe not in the first session, maybe not in the second or third, but as our athlete continues to grow and develop and become amenable to all of these new exercises. And that's why we always want to approach things from the perspective of the athlete. How are they tolerating this new exercise? Are they perfectly good with it? Okay, great. Then we may be able to nudge forward a little bit if it makes sense. So what are some of the best practices around ensuring that our athletes, number one, are not experiencing pain, or if they are, we modify the exercise. But we also support the athlete because a new exercise or a challenging exercise is uncomfortable. Oftentimes when I move an athlete from a pair of 2-pound sandbells to a pair of 4-pound sandbells, in fact, it happened today. I had an athlete who said they're too heavy. And it's not necessarily that the weight is too heavy. It's that the athlete is unfamiliar with it. It can be overwhelming because it's a new stimuli, a new challenge. And quite frankly, sometimes because we're moving from the little red sandbells to the bigger yellow ones. And that can be a little fear inspiring. So we want to support the athlete with where they're at around the exercise. Some of the best practices are to ask questions, not rapid fire and not, okay, well, what about this and what about this and what about this, what about this, because that's just going to further aggravate and overwhelm the athlete. But I might ask some pointed questions starting with, well, okay, where does it hurt and when does it hurt when you're doing the exercise? The next thing is it pain or is it discomfort? And the way as a coach and as a professional, I can make some educated decisions about this is understanding what good technique is. So if an athlete is squatting with good technique to a depth that is currently safe and appropriate for them, it is unlikely, not impossible, but very unlikely that they are experiencing pain if that movement pattern looks good. So if I have an athlete squatting to a box, and their feet are on the floor, their knees and hips are not caving in, what we call valgus or internal hip rotation. If their back is relatively straight, maybe a little forward lean, but they're not flexing over. If the movement looks sound, and this is of course what we teach in the Autism Fitness Certification, if the movement looks good, then it is unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that the athlete is experiencing pain. It's probably more discomfort from doing the movement, especially in the cases of where we're introducing the movement or we're progressing or increasing the challenge of a movement as well. So focusing on athlete technique is key as well. And then finally, supporting the athlete from a behavior-specific praise perspective and acknowledging the fact that they are doing something that's challenging. So if an athlete tells me that something is really hard, rather than say, oh, you know what, you're right, it is really hard and maybe you shouldn't do it today, I might just say to the athlete, yeah, it is hard. And you know what, you're strong enough to do this, so let's try. And if that works, great. If the athlete is giving a lot of pushback, we may modify it again. But sometimes an athlete will just straight up say, this is too hard. And when the athlete says this is too hard or this is too challenging, we don't want to make it oppositional and then say, no, it's not too challenging or no, it's not too hard, or automatically say, oh, but you can do it. First, we want to acknowledge it's really important to buoy, if you will. I don't know if I've ever used that term before, but buoy their trepidation with, I don't think that sentence has ever been said either, buoy the trepidation. but it's a good one, I think. Anyway, with the acknowledgement of, yeah, it is challenging for them, or they may be a little nervous about doing a heavier weight. Even if it's 1 pound heavier, sometimes it's not even necessarily about the weight, but about the fact that that athlete is doing something new. So they're moving from the red sandbells to the yellow sandbells, or they're moving from a 4 pound weight to a 5 pound weight, or for those of you using the metric system, it would be a 2 kilo weight up to a 2.5 kilo weight. Oh, good at that. And so what we want to do is acknowledge first, yeah, it's challenging, and let's try this. And then we can go into, I think you've got this. And with some of our athletes, we can even say, well, you've already done 2 sets with the red sandbells or 2 sets with the 5 pound dumbbells. I think it's ready. You're ready for an even heavier weight now. It depends on that athlete's profile. It depends on their information reception and how they process information as well. But we want to make it a conversation with that athlete so that they feel listened to, they feel safe, and then they're ready to take on that challenge. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I'd love to know what you think. To reiterate, and go down the PAC profile that's physical, adaptive, and cognitive. Again, that's our standard operating practice in autism fitness programming. When we have an athlete who mentions that something hurts, we want to discover, first of all, if that is in fact the case. Does it actually hurt, or is that athlete in discomfort? So from the PAC profile perspective, physically, are they performing the exercise with appropriate form and technique? Not too fast, not a jerky movement. And are we sufficiently modifying and providing structure for that exercise? Again, technique is really important for our athletes. So it's not just about giving them an exercise and saying, well, these are 3 or 4 great exercises for the autism or neurodivergent population. That's not enough. We need to understand the standard, progression, and modification for each exercise that we're using so that we can implement it and program it for that athlete in a safe and sustainable and really in an effective way. So if an athlete is demonstrating that their knees and hips are internally rotating and caving in when they're doing that squat, then we provide lower body support with a box or a bench. These are all the things that we use in autism fitness as strategies so that the athlete can perform the exercise as safely and structurally sound with technical integrity as possible. So physically, the appropriate modification. Adaptively is ensuring that the athlete is motivated to perform the exercise, and if they are experiencing some discomfort around it, making sure that first we acknowledge it, and then also make sure that if we are introducing something new, that the athlete has ample time to process that as well. From an adaptive standpoint, we always focus on motivation and focus. So the more motivated an athlete, and by the way, we can use behavioral momentum for this as well. So if an athlete is completing 1 or 2 exercises that they're already familiar with, there's a much better likelihood that they're going to be able to meet that new challenge successfully. So we want to use behavior-specific praise, and we want to use behavioral momentum in order to keep our athlete focused, engaged, and motivated sufficiently that when we are increasing the challenge of an exercise, then they are going to be capable of doing it. And if they are demonstrating a real aversion to progressing that exercise or even trying a new exercise, we can back off a little bit and reintroduce it at a time when it's more appropriate. And then from a cognitive perspective, communication is a really important factor here, because when an athlete tells us that they are experiencing some type of pain, we have to take a step back and look at it objectively. And then it may and often is a language consideration. So does that athlete have the capability? Do they have the lexicon, the verbiage to be able to say, this is uncomfortable? Because oftentimes, again, after we rule out all of our other issues, the situation may be that the athlete is experiencing discomfort or duress from doing a challenging exercise, but it's not actual pain. The difference between pain and discomfort, because pain at a base level means that something is wrong. Discomfort means that they're doing something challenging and it may not feel like the greatest thing ever when they're performing the exercise. Is a different story as they become more familiar with it. So working on the language, and then as much as we can, having a conversation to support that athlete. And this is a learning opportunity as well. So when our athlete says this hurts, or this is too hard, or this is too challenging, that's not the end of the conversation. That's the beginning of the conversation right there. Again, we need to rule out, is there a medical, physiological issue? If form is good and it's just that this athlete is unfamiliar with this exercise, then we need to adjust the way that we're approaching it so that the athlete, again, feels accounted for, feels safe, and is motivated enough to complete that exercise, right? So from a physical, adaptive, and cognitive perspective, that athlete is supported. I'd love to know if this has been helpful for you. I'd love to know what you think about this, if you've ever encountered a situation where you've had an athlete who says that an exercise hurts or a movement hurts, what you've done about it, and if any of this has been helpful, any of these strategies were something that, oh, I wish I knew this before, but now you can use it. Drop those in the comments below. If there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, leave that in the comments below as well. I love answering these questions. And if you are ready to join the Movement for Movement and go pro, whether you're a professional, parent, family member, you can go to autismfitness.com, learn more and more about the Autism Fitness Certification program, and of course, download the course syllabus so you know exactly what you're getting. I am Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the Movement for Movement. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Tuesday Training.